friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the show that profiles authors, editors, publishers, and various people in the book industry in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm your host, Carter Seaton, and I'm glad to have you with us again today. Of course, we're back on Zoom, and will be for the foreseeable future, I expect. Today, our guests are, perhaps one has a very familiar name, if not a familiar face to us in the tri-state area, and the other is his partner in crime, shall we say, in writing, Charlie Ryan and Mitch Evans. Charles Ryan, to be formal, or Charlie, as most of us know him, was born a small town boy in Kaiser, West Virginia. His first job was as a disc jockey in a local radio station, and that led to his initial career in journalism after attending WVU. And that's where most of us know him, I'm sure. He moved to Charleston and enjoyed an exceptional career in television news before deciding to make the leap to public relations and advertising by starting Charles Ryan and Associates in 1974. Within 10 years, he'd grown it to the largest advertising and PR firm in West Virginia. That's an honor that Adweek still gives the company today. And his partner in writing is Mitch Evans. He's a native of Clarksburg, West Virginia, and a 1983 graduate of West Virginia Wesleyan, where he studied sociology, psychology, criminology, religion, and business administration. That's quite a combination, Mitch.
Yeah, it is.
While maintaining a keen eye toward the study of history and criminology, he followed his entrepreneurial and pastoral instincts and began his career in 1983 as a financial planner practitioner in Charleston, West Virginia, where he celebrated his 35th anniversary in that profession in 2018. He now lives in Hilton Head, South Carolina, and I understand that Charlie does too. So you all must have collaborated on this book while you were down there. So welcome to Chapters, both of you all. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to have you. Your book, co-written, is called Murder on Staunton Road, The Violent Death of Charleston Daily Mail owner Juliet Staunton Clark. Folks, if you are a history buff, this book will fascinate you. And if you are a mystery reader, you'll love this one as well. It delves into West Virginia history in terms of Charleston particularly, and the story of the two newspapers there, as well as the unsolved murder of the Daily Mail's owner, Juliet Staunton Clark. Charlie, it doesn't surprise me that you would write such a book because of your long career as a journalist, but tell us why that appealed to you, or was it Mitch's idea as a criminologist?
Well, it's interesting, Carter. A couple of things on the background notes that we need to update. Mitch actually lives in Charleston. He has a vacation home in Hilton Head. And I lived in Charleston, in Hilton Head up until about 4 years ago. And we moved up to Charlotte and the Charlotte area. We're actually across the border in South Carolina to be near grandkids. So that is where we are located. But we have the commonality of having the Hilton Head experience, and also the commonality of the fact that Mitch's wife, Ann, is godmother to my grandkids. So we've known each other for quite some time. And of course, my daughter Shandon and Ann, who grew up together, have known each other for virtually all their lives. It's been a wonderful collaboration with Mitch because we have different talents and we brought those together to create something that I think we're both very, very proud of. As to how it all began, I tell this story many years ago, 30 years ago. I was at a home on Staunton Road. And incidentally, it is pronounced Staunton. It's spelled Staunton, and many people pronounce it Staunton, but these Stantons pronounce it Stanton. So it's Staunton Road and the Staunton family. So I'm at a home at a party on Staunton Road. Danny Jones, the former mayor, is sheriff at that time. And so we're standing there talking, and I think it actually was in Danny's brother's home about the Clark murder. And I did not know at that time, but Danny's parents bought the Clark home after Juliet Staunton Clark had been murdered there. And Danny grew up in that house. So I said to Danny, you know, I need to write a book on that murder. And he looked at me and frowned and said, don't go there. And so I dropped the idea. And then when I got into writing, once I had moved to Hilton Head, we were talking, Mitch and I, about various things. And Mitch brought up the Clark murder. And he said he was fascinated by it. And I said, gee, I'm fascinated by it also. And we both said, I guess together, well, why don't we write a book about it? And Mitch has great investigative genes and did a super job with investigating. And then we put all that together along with my remembrances of many of the people that are in the book. And together we wrote this book, which we think has created quite a buzz in Charleston. And we're very gratified with it. It has sold out in its first printing, and we are currently printing a second edition.
Good for you. That's terrific. So, Mitch, was this your first writing experience?
Well, yes and no. This is not my normal fare. I have written articles and am actively engaged in written materials in my day job. Actually, I'm a third generation certified financial planner practitioner in Charleston, and the footprint goes out all over the country, but we're based here in Charleston. And over time, I had seen something about the murder online. You'll see an item or two. And I had interest in this to begin with, but it is my first writing project, and I'm very fortunate and blessed to have been along by Charlie's side with all this, because this has been a great collaboration. And we kind of have a great connection and kind of fill in some of the blanks for each other quite a bit. So it's been a lot of fun. What interested me about the book and what the subject matter was at first, where I read, knowing how the newspaper industry was going with the advent of the internet and the kind of impact that had on the news media world. I determined, it was very interesting to me that where the Charleston Daily Mail had ultimately sold their web domain name to the Daily Mail of the United Kingdom. Some enterprising employee at the Charleston Daily Mail, when the internet came around, snatched up the domain name dailymail.com. And a little bit later, I guess they scooped the UK Daily Mail because they wanted that website, but they didn't have it for all these years.
Hmm.
So finally, as a way of, creating additional liquidity, I guess, for the firm or what have you, I read in the paper, it said, we are changing our domain name to thecharlestondailymail.com. I put two and two together. It became very interesting for me. I started looking up the history of the Charleston Daily Mail. I'm just very curious that way about these things. So up comes a picture online of a fellow named Walter Eli Clark. And of course, I knew enough about the Daily Mail to know the family that was involved there, the Clays, for all those years. But that just drew me into the whole thing. Then I saw some other things that were like splinters on a piece of lumber that just really begged for some research and investigation. Then Charlie, I met, there was a lot of, or got together to talk about it, and everything came together about 3 years ago, and we launched into it.
That's terrific. So one of you all give sort of an overview of the book, so people will know what it's actually about. If they don't know, if they're not from Charleston, they don't know who Juliet Staunton Clark was.
Mitch, why don't you do that, because you've got some keen insight into Juliet.
Sure. Well, the victim, of course, sometimes can get kind of swept up in all of the other sensationalism and kind of forgotten, it seems to me. So it really starts by, the discussion begins with really Juliet Staunton Clark and who she was. But Juliet Staunton Clark was a remarkable woman. And she was one of 5 children born to Will Staunton, a former mayor of Charleston, and Florence Garland Buffington, who married. Juliet was one of the oldest of 5 children in that family. And her father died at the tender age of 45 years old, a former mayor of Charleston. She developed, went to school, grew. She later married. She was born in 1894. She later married the elder Buckner Clay of Charleston, West Virginia, who was an attorney in the practice of the former Spillman Thomas Battle law firm, or its predecessors at that time. And they had 2 children together. Unfortunately, the elder Buckner Clay died in 1923 at the age of 40 years old. And the 2 children were the younger Buckner Clay, who was 4 years old at the time of the elder Buckner Clay's passing, and the younger child, 4 years younger, was not yet born when his father died, and that child was Lyle Buffington Clay, who we all know from the newspaper, These Two Sons, and from their philanthropic activity in the city and all the goodness that they provided to our area here. This Mrs. Clark was a remarkable woman because she persevered through that, raised those 2 boys to be fantastic young men. And then she also, years later, when in their social circle was a gentleman by the name of Walter Eli Clark, who was a former governor of Alaska. Even though Alaska wasn't admitted as a state until 1949, he's always been known as the first governor of Alaska. And so he had moved to town around the 1900s with his wife, Lucy. They they bought the Charleston News Mail essentially out of bankruptcy, and he turned it into the leading afternoon newspaper in our area. And that was the Charleston Daily Mail. This is all very fascinating, but years later, when his wife Lucy died, he and Juliet Lyle Staunton Clay married. He was 25 years older than she, and later they also had a daughter. So it all kind of develops, the book goes along, it kind of explains, it starts with the murder, the events of August 21st, 1953. It goes into the city of Charleston and our founding and the contributions the Stantons provided. There's a link back to Henry Klein Buffington on the paternal side, who was the first mayor of Huntington. This is all the same family.
Right.
And for what this family did for the area, it just was all very interesting. And so the book develops from there. It goes into the characters of the time, develops the role of the newspaper industry. Each of these newspapers, we were a 2-newspaper town, and each of them had, because there was no TV or very little at the time, they had 3 runs per day per paper of upward from 80 to 100 pages. And then also the book gets into the role of the investigation of the murder, the sensational nature of it, and the role of one of our more colorful characters in Charleston history, Mayor Copenhaver, who essentially directed the investigation and was very eager to solve the case, but also not to sully the reputations of anyone who might just be questioned in the case. He was in a very difficult situation, but he was in charge of the investigation from all reports at the time. And it moves on from there. And Charlie, I'll turn it over to you to kind of fill in some of the blanks there, if you would.
Well, one of the things that the book uncovers is the manipulation of the investigation by Mayor Jumpin' John Copenhaver, as you say, trying to protect some of the upper tier names in the Charleston community. He took it out of control of the detectives and had all the files, all the materials that were gathered directed to his office, and those files and the case file have disappeared. Mitch did an extensive investigation into where the case file of this unsolved cold murder might be. And it was either stolen or it has been misplaced, or it's in the hands of a third party somewhere. We don't know where, who, when, what. The book goes into the death and the brutal nature of it. Here is a woman who was struck with a blunt object. She, by all reason, died immediately. It was such a terrific blow that it removed one of her eyes and her eye socket. Then the individual bludgeoned the body with 7 more horrific blows. And this is generally called a crime of passion. It also indicates, in terms of investigating murders of this type, that it very well could have been a relative of Mrs. Clark. So once that's ascertained, it opens up all sorts of possibilities. The last 2 people to see Mrs. Clark alive the night of her murder were her son, Lyle, and her stepson, Arch Alexander Jr. Arch Alexander Jr. was grilled by the police for 13 and a half hours and was never charged. So far as we can ascertain, Lyle was not interviewed by the police. Lyle also left town shortly after his mother was killed, and supposedly went on vacation. So all of those things cause a lot of questions. Annie Jones, that I mentioned earlier, said there's no way that a relative could be involved. He says it was a transient that probably jumped off the train in the Kanawha Valley, walked up the hill to South Hills and Staunton Road, and tried to rob Mrs. Clark. Well, Mrs. Clark had 5 diamond rings on her hand. She had lots of jewelry there. She had money, etc. None of that was taken, although a red billfold was missing, and some think that perhaps was a red herring to take the billfold. So there are a lot of theories. And the interesting thing is, Carter, that as the book is being read, people are taking notes as they read the book, and then they are sending us their theory on how it might have occurred, on who might be responsible. And so it's been very much a buzz thing, as I say, in Charleston as to who killed Mrs. Clark, who was covering up, or was there a cover-up? You know, interesting, the crime scene apparently had no yellow tape around it, as we see today, and folks sort of came and went around the murder scene. So it was it was a sloppy investigation at best.
Do you think that that the crime might more easily have been solved if Copenhagen hadn't taken over?
Well, that's a good question. I think that it would have been, it may well have been. I don't, for John Copenhagen, it was sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't, because he was trying to solve the case, but he also was trying to protect these names, and he didn't want someone to be unfairly accused simply because they were a relative. Mm-hmm. But if the detectives were in charge, some different things would have happened. There's a revealing interview with the lead detective on the case, W.W. Red Fisher, and I knew Red Fisher back in the day when I covered City Hall, and he was quite a detective. He had, and it's in the book, information that he said was not, I'm paraphrasing, but wasn't well received by the mayor.
I'm sorry, say that again. I
said Red Fisher had information that really wasn't well received by the mayor, and Fisher says the mayor did not act upon it. Huh. And at one point, the mayor said he knew who was guilty of the crime, but you couldn't prove it. So it's very interesting. And the other thing that's interesting here is these names and these families. There were a lot of back in that day, I suppose, given the fact that we did not have the medicines that we have today, the healing power that we have today. A lot of these folks died early, and then there was a second marriage, sometimes a third marriage. And when you take a look at the family tree of the Stantons and their families that all lived in that little enclave up in South Hills, it's quite something to try to disassemble the spaghetti that's there.
Yeah, right. So, Mitch, did you do most of the investigating and the research?
I think Charlie and I both, contributed. It's kind of, I'd split it between the two of us, I would say. I think that we began by reading just as many newspaper articles as we possibly could, but it's probably safe to say that I was more the research expert on this, and Charlie did the phrase turning in the book and the wordsmithing.
And what about personal interviews? Did you all interview people in the family?
Yes, we both did interviews, and we interviewed, I think it was, goodness, I don't know how many people I'd take to say, but probably 15, 20 people, something like that. A little difficult to do a whole host of interviews because this happened in 1953 and so many of the people are gone. But we interviewed Buffy Merrill Wallace, who was integral in the book and who was there on Staunton Road as a child when the murder occurred. We interviewed several detectives that were active later in the Charleston Police Department. We interviewed, in addition to Buffy, her brothers, John and Richard. We interviewed Danny Jones, Mayor Amy Schuler Goodwin, and help me, Mitch, the others.
Well, the gardener.
Yeah, Tom Tolliver, who was a gardener for Mrs. Clark, and he was quite insightful. Mrs. Clark's nieces, the daughters of the publisher of the Daily Mail. We interviewed them, Betsy Stanton Johnson, and Flo, or not Flo, but Fan Stanton Ogilvie, who is the poet laureate of what's
Martha's Vineyard, or
yes,
Vineyard? Yeah.
She's the poet laureate of Martha's Vineyard. So all of those folks, in addition to others.
Were the family members eager to get this information out, or were they reluctant to talk about it?
They were not reluctant at all. That surprised me a great deal, because they seemed, and Buffy said to us, Buffy, who still lives there on Staunton Road and is as sharp as a tack, she's 80, 82, I think. And she remembers all of it quite vividly. And she said that she had said to her brother, John Merrill, who had Merrill Photos for many years, if someone's going to write a book about this, they better come see us. And so Mitch and I walked through the door. So they were very, very kind and spent a lot of time with us. Mitch and I both were in Buffy's home and then walked the area where the murder had occurred. So we felt we had a really good feel for what happened, and we think the book is quite accurate.
Yeah. And the pictures you had so many wonderful pictures in there. Did they come from the family scrapbooks and from the newspaper?
They came from family scrapbooks. They came from the newspaper. They came from on file at various public places where these photos had been deposited. And some of them we took ourselves. Mitch took the pictures of Paula Butterfield, or received from Paula Butterfield, the pictures of Paula and Lyle Clay. Paula Butterfield was a close friend of Lyle's, following Lyle's wife's death, and she gave Mitch a tremendous interview in the book.
It's a fascinating book, I tell you. I was a little bit like some of the people who are writing to you. I was trying to figure out who did it myself. So, did either of you form an opinion of who you think did it? I know you couldn't put that in the book, but did either of you form an opinion?
I think Mitch gets to handle that one.
Okay.
Well, we certainly had no expectation, very little, if any, of cracking the case. That would really be ideal. But when we found out that none of the investigating authorities, the FBI, the state of West Virginia, the county, nor the city, had any files or any evidence, nothing, after extensive investigation, we cast that aside pretty quickly, any expectation of solving the case. We did uncover what we think to be some interesting potential motives. And, it's interesting because you can probably point, I was thinking this the other day, it'd be nice to put this on kind of a flow chart on a big chart, like a big 3M chart, to list the potential suspects and then to kind of rule them in or out. But yeah, I have opinions, and I can build a highly circumstantial and suspect case around several people. But nothing in any way definitive. But we have some opinions.
Do you think those files will ever be found?
I'm sorry, did we think what?
Do you think those files will ever be found?
Well,
The
I'll
police
let Mitch,
record.
talk about that, but I would say before he gives a more informed opinion, I think that I personally think the files are somewhere. You can tell in the book that Mitch was quite exhaustive in trying to obtain the file. I'm convinced that it's either still there or someone has it, or it is lost and they don't know where it is, but within City Hall. Now, we have uncovered some information from people that have read the book and have talked with us, and supposedly there's some correspondence from the investigative parties involved that does exist, and we are hopeful and think we will obtain that shortly. We don't know what's in it, but the murder or the mystery goes on. Mitch,
this is the most sensational murder case in Charleston history, of perhaps the most prominent socialite in the history of our fair city. And there are no files.
Interestingly, there's the companion murder in Huntington of some
right
in the same family.
Right. Yes, that's we wrote about that in the book, and that really ups the ante, because that's also an unsolved case.
Yeah.
They did charge her son from a previous marriage, but as you know, but I believe I take the view of it that with regard to the files and the evidence, there was precious little evidence to begin with. But I take the view that the file does exist. It was 18 inches thick at least. And I believe that it's very likely that it could be in a place where people who we've even asked might not even know about.
Yeah.
It would have been in a special place. It would have been in a place that perhaps through transitions and administrations, they're just not familiar with where it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Though I have every confidence that there was an exhaustive search set forth on the part of the city to find it. But I think it's in a depository someplace that maybe folks don't even know about, or in a locked drawer someplace.
Well, we've lost Charlie someplace along the line. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we still have your sound, Charlie, I think.
Yeah.
Well, we're about out of time. I just want to ask one more question, and that is, if you find those files and you get a little more information, will you do another edition?
Yes.
All right, good.
I agree. If we find that, there's another book.
There you
Yep.
go. Folks, thank you all so much for being with us. It's wonderful. And if you out there, the viewers, want to figure out a way to solve a mystery and take this one on yourself, be sure to read Murder on Staunton Road. It is.
And by the way, I should plug our website.
Yes.
It's Murder on Staunton, murderonstanton.com. That's STAUNTON, murderonstanton.com.
All right. Thank you all so very much for being with us. And we hope that you, the viewers, will join us the next time we come to chapters on Armstrong Television. And in the meantime, be sure to keep watching Armstrong for the news and views that impact you. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Carter.
Connect with Chapters through email. Write to lp4@zoominternet.net. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. All Chapters episodes are available on YouTube. Visit the Armstrong Neighborhood channel on YouTube and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.